My own recovery journey from chronic fatigue syndrome was a living nightmare. It took me many, many years. And in those years, there were no recovery stories, no recovery programs, just some horror stories on the internet. And because I was so severe, I went through every stage of chronic fatigue syndrome multiple times, maybe hundreds of times. And therefore, I can state that my recovery journey is your recovery journey. So eventually, I started playing with my symptoms and I noticed that I could influence my symptoms. I could help them increase and I could help them decrease. And that led to what I thought was my recovery. And I was eager to share that with Raylan Egel 4 or 5 years ago. But as it turned out, there is a big difference in being healed or being recovered. And I was just recovered. Yet having the interview with Raylan, although she was still having a very small YouTube channel at that time, that changed my life completely. Because at that time I had a free recovery program and that allowed me to help a lot of people. And a lot of people reached out and I did a lot of one-on-one coachings with people with chronic fatigue syndrome over the course of a few years. I think that I've coached more than 1,200 clients in person. But this is not really the story that I want to share. So let's move back. Let's start from the very beginning. So when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, I fell into a pit of darkness with no hope. I basically gave up about my life. It was all pointless because I tried everything and nothing worked. And day after day after day, I was stuck in my bed. And sometimes I was fit enough to go to the garden. And on many days, I was lucky if I could make it to the bathroom. Part of that reason was as well that I followed a lot of old advice that people are still following these days, like the baseline, the spoonie mentality, the detoxing mentality, the belief that there is something wrong with the body. But I discovered that none of that is actually helpful. So after I developed my own tools, I started improving. But that was only in a certain framework. Only if I was limiting myself and limiting life, removing myself from life, or living in a very calm way did I feel well. But what I know now is that's not really life. If we aim on calming down the nervous system the entire time, then yeah, you might be very calm, but life is much more vibrant. And therefore, after I shared my recovery story with Raylan, I relapsed because I went back to life. I went to live inside of a community in Germany, and everyone was triggering there. It was a very unhealed place. And it didn't last long before I completely collapsed, extreme relapses, you name it. And then I was there. I needed to pay the rent. I had already some coaching clients. So what should I do? And I think that the free recovery program was attracting a lot of people, maybe 10,000 of people. But the recovery rate was very, very low. And part of the reason for the low recovery rate was that people were not committed. But even if we put that aside, I think the recovery rate would probably maximum be around 5%. And I did in the program, I gave everything that I thought that should be there because people told me that, like pacing, being a spoonie, or a lot of techniques to calm down the nervous system, and brain retraining. And brain retraining in those days were basically just refocusing yourself to another state of mind. But I noticed that they did not work. Okay, if I would attract 10,000 of people who were committed, I would actually have a lot of recovery stories. But what to do with all the others, the 95% people who understand brain retraining, who understand the mind-body concept, who understand pacing and all these tools, what should I do with them? Plus, I was having a relapse myself, so it obviously didn't work. And I'm really glad that I met Valentina in that time because one day I was with her and I started developing symptoms after having a phone call. I said to her, I need to go to bed. I'm so exhausted. I'm okay. My life is over. I just have to move between a very narrow framework of things that I could do, being only a shallow version of myself. I go and rest right now. I have to go to sleep. And she said, no, we're not doing that because she thought it was funny. Why was I reasonably okay before the phone call and extremely exhausted after the phone call? So we started diving in, and I already had some tools. I already knew a little bit about emotional healing. And as it turned out, the phone call triggered a lot of fear inside of me. And when she made me feel that fear, I became emotional and the symptoms just disappeared instantly. So, first of all, I had no symptoms almost. Then I had a lot of symptoms. And then I had no symptoms. And that was all within 30 minutes. So, this changed everything for me. Everything that I thought that I knew about chronic fatigue syndrome, all the tools about calming down the nervous system, brain training, pacing, none of it mattered anymore. And I started removing them from the program. Also because I needed donations because the program was donation based. So for me, it was really important that people actually healed it, because otherwise they wouldn't donate. I mean, if we offer these tools that are very popular still until this day and age for, let's say, €1,000, and let's hope that 5% will heal, then we become rich and there is no motivation anymore to improve. So it was only 3 days later when I was speaking to a man, and he had a lot of chronic pain as well. I tried to see what the emotion could be, and it was anger. At least that's what I thought. So I triggered him into feeling his anger, and I told him, "Aren't you angry that chronic fatigue syndrome and pain is destroying your life?" Because he was sort of like a sportsman before that, and he kept redirecting me to something else. Like, it was like he couldn't really see anger. So I kept pointing him towards his anger, like 3 or 4 times, and he was distracting every single time. But then it became impossible for him to avoid his anger. And what happened? His symptoms started amplifying. So instead, we processed the anger. He felt it through and he became symptom free. So that was my first attempt, and I managed to have a good result. Beginner's luck. Because in the years after that, we had to perfect this. This had to work for everyone. And I think it does. At the same time, I still had symptoms every day because healing is different from recovery. Healing means that your body wants to let go of an old stressor probably every day or every other day. That means that every other day, the brain is going to perceive that emotion as a danger and create symptoms to protect you. So maybe I was fine one day, but then I woke up extremely exhausted in a crash, and then we had to find new ways to let me experience what I call a release. Is that when you shiver, shake, cry, vomit, burp, etc., and then all of a sudden you become emotional and then symptom free. So we needed to find more ways because I had to function, because I had to pay the rent, I had to help other people. And sometimes it was really like that, that in the morning I had a coaching session with a client and I woke up an hour before that, maybe full of symptoms. And I was just really busy 1 hour to become symptom free to then become, be able to have that coaching call an hour later. So there was a lot of pressure on it. And every day we were obsessed with finding ways to let me release, but also to let the clients experience a release. I was completely obsessed. I was completely focused on this. I couldn't think of anything else. Like if you would have asked me any other question than this, couldn't really do it. I was even starting to forget all my recipes that I could cook for dinner. And as a result, I was hardly eating. I was so obsessed. But then in the summer of 2023, so that's 2 years ago, when I had no longer um, symptoms myself, or not on a daily basis anymore, maybe once a week, I realized that I got it because I put so much pressure on it And I think that I managed to make clients experience an instant release of the emotion and an instant dissipation of the symptom, probably around 90% of the time. And then I just realized that my quest that was lasting over 10 years ended. I had arrived. So I took some time. I canceled all my coaching sessions. I started crying. It's like just over a decade of suffering, even the attempt to find it out and to so yeah, all of a sudden I had arrived and I started wondering, what do I want to do with my life? Do I actually want this? I received in the years before that um, quite a lot of negativity because I was canceled by all the other program creators. Um, I was even copied from a lot of old clients that sometimes I just helped for free. I noticed that the recovery world is such a toxic place. Do I want to work in this? And at first I said, no, no, I don't want this. But then within 3 weeks, I was like, yeah, we have to do this. And I'm going to close the program. And the old recovery program was dead anyway. These were just a handful of tools that such a low recovery success rate that we just need to get rid of it. And then I started release. And with the release program, we guarantee everyone at least one full release in their period in the program. It's not anymore about recovery because healing is different. But one full release, that means that you have symptoms, you dive into your body, you become emotional, and the symptoms are gone. That's what we promise. And after that, you should have the tools and the knowledge to implement a release and to become symptom free every day, just like me. I wasn't I was recovered really simply, but after that, the real healing started. And that is about reconnecting with all these parts of you inside of you that are in pain, like fear, for example. I told myself not to feel fear. I told myself not to feel anger. I told myself not to feel my shame. That is a result of suppressing all these emotions. I told myself not to feel the loneliness, the extreme loneliness, which is also the consequence of the emotion inside of you that tries to talk with me. And it's about integrating all these emotions into who you really are. And step by step, you become alive again, vibrant. I could exercise again. And life started to unfold itself. And I was so grateful that I had Valentina there every day because I needed her. Couldn't have done it without her. And recently, we made a lot of updates to the program because we have to improve, because we want to make sure that everyone experiences at least one release. But that's not enough. I want everyone to experience hundreds of releases in the year. I want them to completely close Facebook, to get rid of all these toxic groups that are still sharing the same stuff that they were already sharing 10 years ago. I want them to be able to release and continue their lives. And you will find out it's not only about becoming symptom free, it's about transforming yourself into who you already are. So thank you for watching and have a beautiful healing journey.